Say good morning to you, Grenada, Carriacou, PT Martinique, the rest of the Eastern Caribbean, the world. Those of you join us live via GBN TV, good morning to you. Those who are also joining us via the various social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, good morning. Whatever part of the world you are this morning. Thanks for making us your choice for, of course, getting you through your day, and certainly hope that you are having a good one thus far. Welcome to The Point for today, Tuesday. It's the 18th day of January 2022, and today, not been a typical open line segment today, not like we had as of yesterday. But today we do have guests per se, and they are as follows: the political leader of the National Democratic Congress. Yes, that's Mr. Dickon Mitchell. Hope I get the name right. We also have the Assistant General Secretary. That's Ron Redhead. And they are both with me this morning. We're going to just get deep into the matter and just say good. Let them have a bit of an introduction this morning. Good morning to both of you gentlemen. How are you this morning?
Good morning to you, and good morning to the listeners of GBN To The Point program, both within and outside of Grenada. It's Dickon Mitchell, and it's a pleasure to be on this morning.
All right.
Happy New Year to all of our citizens, even though we are midway through the month.
Mm-hmm. Good morning to Ron. How you doing?
Morning, sir. Not too bad. The same sentiments expressed by political leader, I would like to express the very same.
Wow.
I wish everybody the best for 2022.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to have both of you this morning. As of course, they can actually mention. I hope you don't mind the first name basis, sir. You know.
No, absolutely. In fact, that's one of the things I think we should encourage in Grenada. Mm-hmm. Your name is your name. And I think, unless you completely disagree with your parents, that's how you should be.
All right.
That's how you should be.
All right, man. Well, it's 2022 is a new year. I think it's the first time you goes on to the point for the year thus far. I think it's the first time. I'm hoping. This is the first time for 2022, right? For both of you. Would I say so?
Yes, it's the first time for 2022, and in my case, it's the first time that I'm on the program. So, happy to be here.
Well, of course, it's my first time hosting the program so far. Also, not first time on air doing it, but first time doing it in this particular capacity. So, it's a first for me, first for both of us in that capacity. So, let's get into the meat of the matter this morning. Of course, you being the political leader of the National Democratic Congress. Off the bat, how has it been for you thus far? How do you feel being the political leader of the National Democratic thus far, sir? That goes to Dickon.
Well, it's been a very humbling experience, but at the same time, a very energizing one. Mm-hmm. My interaction with the public has been largely favorable, very encouraging. A lot of well-wishers, a lot of persons who support the change agenda and the transformation agenda that we've been speaking about. So overall, it's really been a very pleasant experience. Interacting with the citizens of Grenada has been very rewarding, and I look forward to continuing to do so. I look forward to their continued support, and we look forward to ensuring that our citizens take the right to vote and the right to exercise their franchise seriously, recognizing the fundamental importance it plays in our democracy, and crucially, the fact that it puts the government in power, and that government is required to govern on behalf of the collective best wishes of the citizens of Grenada. So I look forward to continuing to do my part, and I'm sure Ron does the same. And we want to encourage all Grenadians to take part in the civic process, not just voting, but voice your concerns, get involved in your communities, and be active. And as active citizens, that's how we will build our nation.
All right. Let me say hi to Ron once again. Ron, you, of course, being the Assistant General Secretary, of course, I'm not too familiar with the other posts that you may have held within the party. But how does it feel for you? Being part of being the Assistant General Secretary, how does it feel?
Yes, it's a continuation of the work that is required. As Gelen mentioned, we need to continue to encourage members that they need to get registered to vote, but not just vote, but participate in democracy. So that is a very complex process, but it's ongoing, and it's a part of the duties, and I welcome the responsibility.
All right. Now, we're talking in Grenada, of course, COVID-19. That's what I want to get into as an intro in terms of the whole discussion this morning. Mr. Dickon, What's your views on COVID-19 in Grenada? What's your views on it as being the political leader? What's your views on COVID-19?
Right. Well, the starting point, obviously, is that I think we need to recognize that COVID-19 is perhaps the latest in a series of emerging new diseases, viruses that we've had to deal with in recent times, and thus far COVID-19 perhaps being the most severe. We've had 1 year prior to that, which affected significant portions of the population. There's in other parts of the world, there's the risk posed by Ebola. Prior to that, there were other SARS diseases which came out. So I think we need to recognize that the likelihood that this trend will continue is quite probable.
All right.
And so in that sense, and given that we are part of the global world, given that travel is frequent and often, given that we depend on tourism, it means that we need to pay attention to those things and recognize that protecting ourselves first individually and then as a nation is paramount. So second, I want to say, obviously, particularly for those who've been affected by COVID-19 and most of those who lost loved ones, my sympathy, I empathize with families, and particularly since a number of our senior citizens died as a result of having contracted COVID-19. But we also have to recognize that we have to be able to, as human beings, adapt, survive, and thrive with diseases. I would say part of the challenge to human existence has always been us combating and overcoming diseases either on a micro or macro level when they turn pandemics or epidemics. So in that sense, given that we've lived with the virus for the last 24 months or so, I think we have to have a sense of calm and a sense of ration and reasoned debate as to how we move forward collectively as a society to minimize the spread of the infection, to minimize deaths, and also to minimize disruptions to our way of life.
All right. Now, tell me, I know we see what has happened place in Grenada with COVID-19 in terms of how government is managing the health sector and so forth with COVID-19. What, in your personal view, sir, do you think needs to be done to even stem this disease or this pandemic that way, and even better in Grenada?
All right. So, I mean, it's obviously a very difficult task to manage the current state of affairs. There's no question about that. We have limited resources. We are an open society, and we are social beings. Perhaps we're more social than many other parts of the world where persons like to interact. We're small, we know each other, and spending time with loved ones, spending time with friends, spending time with socializing is an integral part of our way of life. And I would just say also an integral part to maintaining our mental health. But I think one of the things to me that is really missing from the way in which the COVID-19 response has been handled is I do not think that there has been sufficient consultation with all stakeholders so that we can develop a national approach to how we manage the virus and how we minimize disruptions to our life. And this far advanced into the process, there still appears to be no coherent plan as to how we treat with COVID-19. Right. And I think that comes from the fact that there has not been sufficient, in my view, attempts to have deep and meaningful and ongoing consultation, because obviously the situation is fluid with all of the sectors of the society. And I'll give an example. So, for example, we knew the day that schools were required to reopen traditionally. And so obviously we were on a vacation break. We would have gone into the vacation break with us not having school taking place physically. We would have had a spike in cases over the vacation. You have a first week in which schools are not open, and then within the space of 5 days, an announcement is made that says schools will be reopened and you can attend physically. But the reality is that announcement isn't matching the reality on the ground. And I'll give an example. If we take Presentation Brothers College, where my son attends, he's only going to classes 1 day per week. So in reality, 80% of his time is still spent online. And again, it seems to me if we are planning that should not be the case, and that if we are announcing that you're back in schools, then you have to ensure that the preparation was done, that the plans were in fact practical and could be implemented, so that when you say children are going back to school, and they're resuming physical classes, that in fact that is happening, but it's not. So the policy announcement is not matching the reality by there's a considerable gap. And I think that is the biggest challenge. And given the fact that we've not faced a challenge like this before, with all due respect to our government, the 8 or 10 or 15 persons sitting in cabinet, or the 4 or 5 or 6 persons who may be sitting on the COVID-19 committee, will not have the answers to how the society should move forward collectively. Hence the reason for having, in my view, the sustained engagement with the citizens, so that we, the citizens, can assist in crafting a policy that we buy into, we support, and that we act upon. So in the absence of that, I think this sort of ad hoc, flip-flopping, one thing today, another thing tomorrow will continue.
All right. Certainly take of course, your statements there into perspective, and I hope the authorities, if they are listening, of course, may understand where you're coming from. Just a slight diversion there with of course, my level of question this morning. Though you have, I would like to hear from you, of course, your views on Dr. Mitchell and his leadership. And you mentioned a while ago PBC. You know, I understand both of you being old boys of of that particular alma mater. Tell me your views on Dr. Mitchell and his leadership as we divert slightly.
All right, well, let me put it this way. I will tell you my views on what I think leadership is about.
Yeah.
First of all, if you elected prime minister of the country, essentially you're a servant leader. Mm-hmm. It means you are ready there to serve the public, and it requires not just at election time or pre- election time. It requires, in my view, a systematic approach to engaging with the citizens, to having feedback, and to, particularly on big ticket issues or issues that will affect the nation in general, to ensure that the policy decisions and the direction that you take the country in has buy-in from the citizens. And sometimes as a leader, it also means you have to make difficult decisions, but you have to be prepared to subject yourself to the public, to explain, to educate, to justify, and to defend your decisions if you are convinced, as someone who's been asked to lead the country, that decisions are in the best interest of the nation.
Yes.
And I do not think that we've had over the last, frankly, I would put it this way, I do not think post 1983 or 1984 that Grenada has had sufficient leadership that speaks to the welfare of Grenada in general, as distinct to limited groups or interest groups within the country. And I will give an example. When you hear the statistics that come out from CXC, in terms of how our students do at math, if I was the Minister of Education, I frankly would be ashamed, because the pass rate is woeful, and yet you do not hear a concerted effort or even a public outburst or cry or indication that sort of low pass rate is unacceptable, and that as a nation and that as a ministry, we will do all in our power to correct the trajectory and put us in a position where, for example, our students understand and do better in math. And if we understand that we live in a world of technology, that we live in a world of digitization, we live in a world of the creative arts, and that includes things like music. Math is fundamental to that.
Yes. And
so we must recognize then that as a nation, and we must be prepared to come to the nation and say, this is not acceptable. We must be able to do better. We will aim to do better, and these are the corrective steps that we will take. From a pre-primary school level, a primary school level, to a secondary school level, to a tertiary level. If it means we have to import resources, et cetera, to do so, we will do so. But we never have this kind of engagement, and not even on a micro or macro level. You know, we recognize, for example, that within tourism, almost all of the top chefs who come are imported, which means we are not producing chefs. And I'm not talking about cooks, I'm talking about chefs, persons who can in fact price the meal, tell you whether you're going to make a return on the meal, what your margins are, etc. Persons who can actually create the meals. So if we're promoting tourism, we obviously want our citizens to be the ones benefiting from that. Therefore, one would think you would start asking yourselves, if this is part of our development model, do we have a culinary school that is producing chefs? Is that something that's desirable? Should we be aiming for it? And we don't have that. So I give those examples to demonstrate that leadership means, particularly from a political perspective, addressing the issues that are of concern to the nation, and ensuring that we take steps to continuously build our nation. We're going to be 40 we in the next 2 years, we're going to be 50 years as an independent nation. And so we have to measure what improvements, if any, have occurred in our lives over the last 50 years as a nation. And to me, if we take the last 40 years, we recognize that many of the legacy institutions that we have in Grenada that are successful and that we are proud of, in fact, came out of the immediate aftermath of our independence. For example, our airport, for example, our national insurance scheme. Well, post-1984, post-1985, there are very few, if any, legacy institutions or legacy development agenda that we can point to demonstrate that over the last 40 years, we've put Grenada in a better place than we found it pre-1983.
All right. Dickon, let me ask you this. I have, since you got you involved with the National Democratic and politics per se in Grenada, I'm not sure if you were involved before, but what made you become involved in politics per se? What gravitated to you that made you want to be part of politics in Grenada?
I think the overarching drive is the fact that if you're a citizen of the nation, you have an obligation to give back to your to give back to your country. And in the words of John F. Kennedy, to ask not what your country can do for yourself, but what can you do for your country. I was born in Grenada. I've lived all my life in Grenada. I've been educated in Grenada. I've had a relatively successful career as a lawyer in Grenada. And each citizen, I think, has an obligation to help to contribute towards nation building. And so I asked myself, outside of my private life as an attorney, or in other ways which I've contributed socially to helping persons, for example, who wanted to be educated, etc. Outside of those limited avenues in terms of helping other citizens of Grenada, what would be the most effective way to assist and to get involved? And I thought of a number of ways. I thought of engaging in NGO work, engaging in assisting persons to start businesses and so on. But when I looked at the landscape, I think we recognized that our governance and our politics needs significant changing because I don't think it was focused on the questions of on issue or question of nation building. And from that perspective, I felt it was important for me to hold my hand up and to be counted to ensure that I actually take part in that process, hence the reason for getting involved in politics.
All right. Let me ask you this also. It comes across in the same way, in this particular way. Are you part of any organizations like the Leo and Lions Club and so forth? Are you part of any of those organizations, sir?
No, I'm not a part of the Leo or Lions Club. To a large extent, most of my social work has been done on an individual basis, not a membership basis. So whether Rotary, Leo Club, certainly in terms of sponsorship and stuff like that, whenever there are opportunities to sponsor or help, I tend to do that. To a large extent, prior to my being involved in politics, I wanted to avoid any public spotlight. And I think, and I'm being honest, I think when you help person, you want to help genuinely, not because you want attention to be brought to yourself.
All right.
Because really, I don't think it's necessary, and sometimes it's a little dehumanizing to exploit the vulnerabilities of others, even if you are helping them. So, and to a large extent, that still is my view, that if privately you help persons, unless the persons ask you to disclose it, I really don't think you should be disclosing that you helped someone or someone came to you for help and you were able to assist them. I think you recognize that in your life, persons who would have assisted you may assist you. And so when you get an opportunity to help another citizen, I think you should just do so genuinely.
All right.
And not be boasting and talking about it.
Certainly understand from there. Ron, don't worry, I'll be coming to you. I seem to have, of course, given a lot of attention to Dickon this morning, but I certainly hope you will understand. Let me ask you this once again, Dickon. This is a question that was bubbling in my mind. What is the relationship with the former leaders of the party? Like, if, for example, the former leaders like the Franca Alexis, Bernardine, Nazenberg, Tillman, Philman Farmers, etc. What's your relationship like with them, Dickon?
The relationship is good. I should also say, prior to even getting involved in politics, with many of them, I've had a personal or professional relationship. Mm-hmm. So, for example, with Uncle Tilly, as he's fondly known, I've known him pretty much all of my professional life.
All right.
I know his wife, I know his kids. So, outside of the politics, we've had an excellent relationship. And in the context of the politics, Uncle Tilly would have been one of those who, in fact, encouraged me to take the bold step to get involved in politics. And he made some comments which I think resonated with me, which is the country belongs to us. And if we are not prepared to step up and get involved actively in our country, then we have no right to criticize those who do so, simply because we disagree with their approach or we disagree with their policies. He actually made the comment that if we don't, in fact, get involved and the country ends up being run by rogues,
all right,
then we have no one else to blame but ourselves. So, in that sense, he's been a encouraging and a motivating factor. And I think he represents a symbol of service leadership. His humility, the fact that the office of Prime Minister is not something that he needed to carry around with him to establish his character, to establish who or what he's about. The fact that he's no longer the Prime Minister, I think he walks around like every ordinary citizen. He's treated with respect. He still encourages and speaks openly on issues that matter to him. And I think that is what we need to aim for when we offer ourselves a public service, that you serve, and when your time has come for you to leave, you leave. And you go back to being a regular citizen that continues doing whatever you can to help improve your community and to help support your country and to advocate for the issues that matter to people.
All right. Dickon, I'm still on you this morning. There's a growing concern lately that, with in particular, of course, talk that is concerning, of course, all of folks on island. There are folks who are for and against it in terms of in the cannabis industry. And I'm not sure what is your personal take on it and also your professional take on it. Now, if you elected into office, and let's say, God forbid, that it happens, can we expect a change in the legislation, or of course, or as it relates to marijuana cultivation, the use of it? Give us your take on it. I guess the nation would like to know that.
So let me start off right off the bat by saying, even prior to my being involved with the National Democratic Congress and becoming its political leader, the National Democratic Congress has been championing the fact that we need a policy change in our approach to the cannabis plant, or what is more commonly called marijuana. And so I want to make it clear that the National Democratic Congress has been the one championing for a progressive approach to the marijuana and particularly medical marijuana industry. But I want to just start off by talking a little bit about where we are currently. In the current construct, our laws criminalize the cultivation, the growing, the possession, the use, or the supply of marijuana, with in many instances dire consequences for our citizens. So you face being sent to jail, you face being arrested, you face being locked up, you face being fined, and frankly, sometimes you face the sheer brutality of force, because you're viewed as a criminal if you're smoking a spliff or if 2 or 3 plants of marijuana are found in your yard. So the current state of affairs is that anything to do with marijuana is unlawful, it's criminal in Grenada. In our view, this is backward. It is a misallocation of the state's resources, and Grenada has frankly been left behind when it comes to the issue of a progressive approach to marijuana. So many of our neighboring countries have leapfrogged ahead of us, and frankly, the world has leapfrogged ahead of us when it comes to the approach to marijuana. So the National Democratic Congress has made it clear that we support not just the decriminalization of marijuana, but the legalization of marijuana. And I want to explain the difference between the decriminalization of marijuana and the legalization of marijuana. Decriminalizing marijuana simply means it is no longer a criminal offense, for instance, to be in possession of marijuana or to cultivate marijuana. So that means you may not be sent to jail, or you may not be fined by the judiciary if the police arrest you. But it doesn't mean that it is legal. To make it legal, you need to be able to, in fact, acknowledge, 1, that it is not criminal, and 2, permit it to happen and regulate it. And we are saying we need to, in fact, create a marijuana industry so that our citizens can benefit from the enormous medical and economic benefits that is available from the creation of a marijuana industry.
Okay.
So I just want to end for now because Ron will come in on this.
Well, I'm just about to, of course, chip in on Ron there just a wee bit. Ron, let me ask you this.
I just wanted.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I just want to make one point. Our current government has now indicated its previous position was that over the current leadership's dead body would the legalization or the decriminalization of marijuana occur. Well, thankfully, I think they are beginning to see the light at the end of the spliff, and is coming to terms with the reality that that is a regressive and backward approach. So, regrettably, however, the approach is still backward and still regressive insofar as a draft bill has been tabled in Parliament. That draft bill is called essentially an amendment to the Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Bill. And all that bill is seeking to do is to say, in a very limited sense, if someone has 24 grams of marijuana in his possession, or if someone plants no more than 5 marijuana trees, it is no longer a criminal offense. Additionally, if someone is of the Rastafarian faith, he is permitted to use marijuana for the...
All right. Seem to have a little bit of issue with, of course, the audio from Dickon. Okay. We had a little bit of issue with your audio there, Dickon, just a little bit. Okay, that seemed to be rectified now. Let's go to Ron. He's been sitting and absorbing, of course, the conversation quite quietly, and let's get his views on certain issues that's going on next. Let's talk about the National Democratic Congress. Ron, you being the Assistant General Secretary. Now, tell me, has the party decided on the 15 candidates as yet?
That is an ongoing process, and it's something that certainly the public will hear in short order, coming from the public relations officer and certainly the political leader when that time comes.
All right. Let me ask you this also. Are there any new rules, of course, in terms of selecting caretakers for the party? We've been hearing this, this on the ground talk from time to time, but is there any new rules in terms of for selecting caretakers for the party that was not, of course, done previously?
No, I think pretty much it's the same process because we all have to go through a certain level of scrutiny to determine whether or not somebody is in line with a political organization or shares the political philosophy. So that is always ongoing. There is nothing different in terms of the approach being used to determine the best candidate among us to win a seat.
Okay, well, let me ask you this also. I have so many questions as I've written that I have moving to and fro towards between them this morning, and threw out a whole lot to Dickon this morning. But let me ask you this. Now, the National Democratic Congress has constantly stated that in opposition to the Citizen by Investments program. And there, of course, the allegation that, of course, you, Sir Dickon, and of course, our company has shared involvement in programs. What are the views of the NDC change in relation to the issue of the Citizen by Investment program? Is there any change in that? Is it the views per se?
Well, first off, I don't really agree with the opening statement. What we are against is... Yes, totally understood. Yeah, totally understood. The truth of it, this is not something that we view in isolation. Let's take, for example, a true program of citizenship by investment and the purpose for such a program. You have education. You have health, you have other aspects of the economy which we can invest in or attract citizens to invest in properly to be able to develop the people in the country, one, and also to expand the potential and possibilities of the country. The very marijuana industry, cannabis industry, is a prime example, if we do the thing right, what we could benefit. So we are not opposed to citizenship by investment in healthcare, education, and other aspects of the economy. What we are concerned with is the predominant approach that has been used throughout Caribbean islands and other countries, where these programs are more or less used only to keep people in power. So it's used as some sort of slush fund, where they set up and establish rich people and bring them into a sense of buying our passports to be able to benefit and also link with the political party in power. That kind of structure is not developing our people. So that is what we are concerned with, and for want of a better word that you have used, opposed. So we are not opposed to development.
Okay, certainly understand that. Now, back to you, of course, Ron, once again. I've just been told that it seems like viewers are not too happy with me calling you Dickon, sir, so I will go to Mr. Mitchell to make it a little easier. Of course, you agreed that
No.
I've just been told by, I thought it was okay. We work with a first name basis, which you agreed to. I'm not sure. Probably,
that's fine.
So probably that viewer probably chimed in a little bit late and didn't understand the reason why I continued just calling you Dickon. So, Mr. Mitchell, if it's make it easier, to make it easier for the viewers out there, some folks do take that a little personal. Now, the IMF has given Grenada an excellent mark on their most recent reviews. I'm not sure which one of you two would like to answer this. And in terms of the handling of the economy during COVID, and what is the of course, anything about this statement would you like to add? Anything about the statement that has been said by the IMF that you would like to add towards this in terms of the excellent mark that we get? Anything you like to add to that? You folks like to add to that?
But
I'm not sure. Who wants to take a go at it? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I read the statement. I didn't see that the statement said it was an excellent mark. So I'm not sure if I agree with your analysis. I think the statement was simply, frankly, a regurgitation of what was told to the IMF by the government of Grenada. In a nutshell, this was a virtual review of, and these reviews are standard. Because of the challenges posed by COVID-19, the IMF folks did not attend or come to Grenada. It was a virtual review. And coming out of these virtual reviews, the IMF will essentially publish a one-page statement, which is what it did. In a sense, the highlight of the statement was the fact that the debt to GDP ratio probably moved marginally from in the low 70s to the high 60% thereabout. But save for that, I think what the report in a nutshell, in my view, says is that we are in survival mode. That in effect, the entire construct is about essentially how do we manage in this difficult period. But there was no indication that the government had given thought to where we go from here in the next 24 to 48 months. And I think that is really the critical issue that we have to address as a nation. We know we have still significantly unsustainable debt.
All right.
We know we have high unemployment. We know that one of our major industries, tourism, is going to be continuously affected for the foreseeable future by the COVID-19. And so the question is, where's the government revenues going to come from? And what are the creative approaches that we will take to try and ensure that the government revenues are enhanced? And I therefore want to go back to the question of the legalization of marijuana, because to me, that is one of the areas when we talk about transformative and creative, that is one of the avenues that we need to pursue to put us in a position that we can address where the government's revenue is going to come from. And I'm going to say this because I've been reading a publication prepared by the History Channel, and the front cover of it says marijuana, the cannabis century, modern medicine, tomorrow's cash crop. Now, marijuana doesn't grow everywhere, and we have a unique opportunity, if we have not already lost that, to be creating an industry that has the potential to give us cash and frankly withstand some of the disruptions that will be posed by an ongoing COVID-19 pandemic or other medical pandemics. And we are not seizing upon the opportunity. Our colleagues in St. Vincent, for example, shipped out their first shipment of marijuana as a cash crop. Jamaica is way advanced. Barbados similarly. And I'm saying these are examples that are an arm's length away. And we are still toying around with the question of simply attempting to decriminalize 5 marijuana plants or 28 grams of marijuana when, in fact, we will face significant challenges as a nation as to where our revenue is going to come from to meet all of the challenges that we need to meet. in the next 24 to 48 months. So I'm saying this to say the IMF doesn't run a country. The World Bank doesn't run a country. They've never done so, right? And at the end of the day, saying that you have a good report from the IMF doesn't mean anything if we have significant unemployment, if we have persons who are hungry within our country, if we have children who are not going to school because they do not have access to internet, they do not have access to tablets. And those are the issues we need to talk about, not a report from the IMF, frankly.
Okay, I understand your views on that. Now let's have a slight diversion once again. Barbadians are getting set to go to the polls tomorrow, and in a snap election. In a full 18 months before the election there was constitutionally due to happen, and Mr. Mitchell, once again, I'm going to keep to Mr. Mitchell saying that you've been the head of NDC for barely 3 months. Do you believe that the NDC can win a snap general election in Grenada if PM Mitchell decide, hey, as he says, ring that bell?
Yes.
Yeah.
Snap or long, we believe we can win the election. We think the population of Grenada recognizes that it deserves better governance than it has received over the last several years. We also recognize that we have to talk openly about those issues. One set of people aren't entitled to govern the country. We need to ensure that we create a culture within our political system that says, as I've said, you serve and then you move on so that other citizens can serve. You can't hold offices and take them to your grave. Right? We don't operate a system of a monarchy. We are a democracy.
I understand that.
Right? And I say this, and I just want to chime in on two things. The system where someone can say, I have a bell in my pocket and I can ring it at any time is outdated. Frankly, it's counterproductive to democracy. And it doesn't lead to good governance because it essentially means you're exploiting the system for political advantage. So as a nation, we need to talk about issues such as having a fixed date for election so that the date is known in advance, everybody knows it, and that all political organizations and persons who want to take part in the political process can work backwards from that date rather than being in a position where the party in power always has the advantage of choosing to call elections, the date for elections at its convenience. So snap or long, as I said, we are confident that we can win the election, not because we say so, because we think ultimately it's the citizens of the country who will make that determination. The citizens elect the MPs and have the right to remove them if they are dissatisfied with their performance. So let me make this clear. Elections are not about the opposition. Elections are about the citizens of a country making and giving their opinion as to whether or not they're satisfied with the governance of the country. So an election is really on the referendum, will be a referendum, and the election, when it's called, will be a referendum on the governance of the new National Party and whether the citizens of Grenada, having given it a unanimous, overwhelming mandate of 15-0 twice, back to back, whether the citizens are happy with what they've received, having given them that mandate.
All right. Your answer, of course, has directed directly into my next question that I wanted to ask you, and it's all about your views, sir, on constitutional reform, which can prevent the change situation like snap election and so forth. What's your views on that?
Well, no, we certainly need, I think what has happened with our approach to constitutional reform in the past is that we've politicized it and we've jumbled too many things all together at once. We need to talk about what are the 2 or 3 things that will fundamentally alter our approach to governance, right? Bearing in mind what I call the inherent risk with power. And I think we know, it might be cliched, but it's important when we say things like absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when we say things that when people are given power, they tend not to want to relinquish it, right? So I think we understand human nature and we understand human character. We would recognize that you have to have inbuilt systems to prevent a situation where the persons who get into power don't want to, in fact, walk away, even when their governance is creating diminishing returns for the country as a whole. So for me, from a big ticket item, and in terms of how we approach our governance in Grenada, there are a couple of things, and not many, that I think we need to address. I've pointed to one of them: having a fixed date for elections, having term limits, not just for who becomes prime minister, but term limits as well, in my view, for parliamentarians as well.
All right.
And we can debate whether those term limits could be 15 years, 20 years, 10 years, as the case might be. But I think we also need to have clear term limits, because you want to give the next generation of Grenadians the assurance that they will not be prevented, but will be mentored and encouraged to get involved in civics, to get involved in political life, to serve the country. Right. I think and one other point I would say, the citizens elect their members of parliament. Members of parliament, therefore, must be given resources to allow them to address some of the concerns of the citizens in their constituencies. It is not right for members of parliament to have to depend solely on the question of whether you become a minister and hopefully be able to somehow engineer resources out of your ministry to be able to address some of the basic concerns of our citizens in their constituencies, because that is where the fundamental root of democracy is based, the constituencies and the citizens. And therefore, parliamentarians, frankly, should be paid better if we want to attract the right kinds of persons, and that way we can hold them accountable, so that if they engage in any corrupt or untoward acts, then the people can ask them to account because they are being remunerated fairly. And thirdly, they should be given some resources. Again, we can talk about the parameters of the resources to ensure that they can deliver services on behalf of the citizens. And one of the reasons I raise this is because, you see, I've heard repeated complaints, particularly from folks in the rural parishes, St. Patrick's, St. Andrew, about the fact that we have an excessive concentration of government services in St. George's, and it puts them at a marked disadvantage if you live in St. Patrick. And last week, for example, a classic example was giving, while a birth certificate may cost $5.50 or $7.50 or $7 for someone in St. George's, it will cost someone from St. Patrick $40 or $30 because they have to travel down to St. George's to get it signed. And that's not right. And in our current age of digitization, and frankly, you shouldn't have to be traveling down to St. George's to get a birth certificate. I just use that as an example of the fact that we need to ensure that particularly essential government services are accessible and available to our citizens in their constituencies.
Okay. We've been chit-chatting for a while. Let's take a short break. When we come back, I would invite, of course, calls from the listening public out there who may have a question or two they would like to ask one in the both of you. And when we come back, let's take a short break. We're coming right back. It's To The Point here on GBN TV and K105. We're coming right back.
Rubigas, clean, safe, and reliable LPG is the perfect solution for your commercial and everyday needs. For cooking at home or barbecuing, choose Rubigas LPG cylinders. Available in a variety of sizes from 20 to 100 pound cylinders. Rubigas LPG, clean, safe, reliable. Are you cooking with Rubigas? Get Rubis, get going.
So we're back here on To The Point for Tuesday, the 18th day of January 2022. And I'm speaking with the political leader of the National Democratic Congress. That's Mr. Dickon Mitchell. That's how I like to work with your first names, you know. And, of course, Mr. Redhead. He is the Assistant General Secretary. I'm also offering you listeners the opportunity to chime in with your calls. And but before there's a question that seemed to be bubbling in my mind just a wee bit that I hope Ron don't think I'm forsaking him a little bit in the conversation this morning. Hope you don't feel that way. Ron, let me ask you this. Are you putting yourself up, or are you putting yourself forward as a candidate? And if so, tell us where you plan on running if I think that made him smile a little bit. Tell me about it.
Well, the process for now is entirely internal, and in due time, in due course, we will put forward the names that will be contesting in the various seats throughout the country.
So, in a nutshell, you're not running. You're not running. Are you running or not running?
Well, the process is internal. So once that is complete, then we will
the public will know
the information.
All right.
Yes, certainly.
All right. We do have a caller this morning. Let's go over to the phone line and see what this caller has to offer. Good morning to you, caller.
Good morning. Yeah, the present administration, the NNP government, they have swung away from the marijuana issue, and that is for a particular reason. There is no votes there. I'm asking the NDC to tread carefully on what they say about marijuana going forward. Thank you very much.
All right, that was that call of view there. Dickon, of course, still get it. Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Redhead. You heard the caller say, what's your take on the caller's statement? You think that the NSC should be treading carefully?
No, my response is simple. We accept that there are downsides to the use of marijuana. So when we talk about the legalization and the creation of marijuana industry, we are not necessarily talking about the recreational use of marijuana. Mm-hmm. Right? We are talking about the use of marijuana as an economic crop. There are medicinal benefits from marijuana. The hemp plant is one of the most versatile plants in the world. You can make paper, you can make rope, there are a number of things you can make of it. So we are talking to a large extent about the economic benefits about it. In fact, the draft bill is only contemplating, frankly, the recreational use of marijuana. And we are saying we need to go way beyond that and expand the scope of it. Second, I want to make it clear. The National Democratic Congress isn't a party that simply is interested in playing political football or doing things of political expedience. And it's not the type of leadership I intend to promote. If as a policy, something is good for Grenada, we will advocate for it. We will weigh the pros and cons, and if there are more pros, we will in fact support it. So we are not going to take the approach that simply because people may not vote for you because you advocate a certain policy that you should not advocate it. That level of hypocrisy has not benefited our country. It has not helped to develop our country. And I will repeat it, it is not progressive. So I appreciate the caller's well wishes. I appreciate his advice that we may need to tread cautiously. But we are not going to say things merely to get votes if it isn't something that we believe will redound to the benefit of Grenada. And so when we talk about taking a progressive approach to the creation of a marijuana industry, we appreciate there will have to be checks and balances. That is what the point we are making. We are saying legalize it and regulate it. Because the current system, all it does is that it in fact leaves the huge profits in the hands of criminals. Because marijuana exists, people are smoking it, people are using it, people are cultivating it in large amounts, they're importing, they're supplying, they're exporting, they're selling it. No tax revenue is being generated to the state from that. Instead, we are taking our resources and giving it to the police and prisons and the judiciary to try and, in fact, arrest a few persons who oftentimes are the small players in the game. So, as I said, our position on the need to have a progressive approach to the marijuana industry, frankly, has nothing. It's not an election ploy. And it's not an attempt to get votes. I think it's the other way around because you're finally beginning to see some change in policy on behalf of the government.
Okay. We do have another caller. Let's go over to the caller. Caller, good morning. How are you? Hello, good morning. I seem to may have lost that caller there just a wee bit. We here, folks. It's K105 at GBN TV. It's to the point this morning. We have the political leader of the National Democratic Congress and the Assistant General Secretary with us this morning. And I'm giving callers the opportunity, or you listeners and viewers of it, the opportunity to ask them a question this morning. Good morning. How are you?
And we do thank you. Good morning, Mr. What was the name again? Telesford. Listen, can I have the guarantee that your host, your guests are hearing me well? Can I have that guarantee?
Yes, they are hearing you.
Very well. To Mr. Mitchell, I make this following comment prior to getting into the meat of the matter. Mr. Mitchell, I heard you say in your utterances that Mr. Tillman Thomas, quote unquote, would have encouraged you to get into politics, ... I want you to be much more meticulously careful with the structure would have plus the past participant. I do not want you to make that mistake. If you tell me that, you're telling me in effect that he did not. Because what would have happened never happened. It is not the past tense of anything. Just a grammatical observation. No. Mr. Mitchell, particularly I challenge you on this matter because you're a lawyer of prominence in Grenada. By the way, I didn't introduce myself to you. The name is Citizen John Rollo, common citizen of this here country. I have been searching for some time for A, the Constitution Act of Grenada, B, the Independence Act of Grenada, and I can't find them at all. Have you any knowledge of the existence of these documents, sir? I'd like you to share it with me and to the general public. The final thing is this, for now. It is obvious based on bibliographical references, a document published in 2002 by a commission established by the then government to amend the Constitution of Grenada. It was stipulated there that this here country lives on a document that had never been approved in the Parliament of Grenada. My question to you is this. Finally, what does your party intend to do about this historical anomaly? Thank you very much and have a nice day, will you?
All right. And thank you, caller, for your questions this morning. Who's going to have a go at it this morning in terms of responding to the caller?
Yes, despite your guarantee to the caller, though I was having a little difficulty hearing him clearly, but I will attempt to respond as to what I believe I heard. First, let me thank him for the grammatical suggested correction. I'm grateful for. Second, I'm happy to meet you, Citizen Rolo, via this means. I know Citizen Rolo is one of the citizens of Grenada that always advocates for issues that are important to him and to other citizens of Grenada, and I want to encourage him to keep doing so. Second, on the question of the existence of the, I believe he called it the Independence Act.
Yes.
Right. Well, as far as I'm aware, there's no act or piece of legislation called the Independence Act. What you have is the Grenada Constitution Order. And coming out of that, you have the Constitution of Grenada, which established Grenada as an independent state. I'm saying independent state in the context of no longer having the executive government or the legislative government or the judiciary effectively controlled by the United Kingdom. So obviously, if we understand our history, we've been a colonial. We have been a colony of the United Kingdom and would have gone through various legislative stages which granted Grenada more and more autonomy, and ultimately leading to the period of independence in 1974. So there is no domestic legislation, so to speak, as in legislation emanating out of the Parliament of Grenada, which creates the independent state Grenada. And the reason is obvious. Prior to that, the Parliament of Grenada, which existed, could not create the state of Grenada because the state of Grenada was not a state. It essentially was a colony of the United Kingdom. And so it is the colonizer, frankly, that would have quote-unquote relinquished its right to govern. Hence the reason why we are now self-governing, and hence the reason why we would declare ourselves as being independent. And in that context, independent means independent of the rule of the United Kingdom. But we also have to remember that as part of that, we will have still retained a lot of the traditions of the United Kingdom. We would have still remained part of the Commonwealth. We would still have had the Queen as our head of state, represented by the Governor General, etc. So in that sense, there was no, for want of a better word, revolution in which we threw off all of that and became an independent state. What you would have had more is that of a gradual transition. And as you would see in some of the islands, the transition is continuing because you have changes, for example, in the Commonwealth of Dominica, which would have become a republic when it became independent. Places like Trinidad, which subsequently moved from a Governor General also to a Republican state by having a president. Barbados has done it most recently. So Guyana, for instance, when they got independence as well, similarly. So in that sense, I'm not aware of any domestic act or piece of legislation called the Independence Act. Okay. The third point he raised, I didn't hear him very clearly on it. But I think he was talking about constitution reform and what would be our approach to constitution reform. But I think I addressed that earlier by talking about the 2 or 3 things that I think from the point of view of improving our governance that I think is important for us to address. And I will just repeat them again, the need for fixed date for elections, the need for term limits, not just, as I said, for the whole of the office of Prime Minister, but also for parliamentarians, and the need for parliamentarians to be given adequate resources to be able to address some of the issues that will arise in their constituencies.
Okay. We do have another caller. Of course, the calls are coming quickly. Let's take another caller before we wrap this segment up. Good morning.
Good morning to our host and to our guest, Mr. Redhead, and to our political leader, Mr. Mitchell. Let me first say welcome to The Point, my favorite radio show on TV. And thank you for taking the time off from your busy schedule to talk to us via this medium. We welcome you. We just want to say thanks and continue to put God first in all of your endeavors, and He will surely direct your path. I know it's very difficult. You may not always have smooth runnings. You would find opposition, but I believe that with God, all things are possible, and you'd be able to handle such. Mr. Mitchell, I really would like you to kind of enlighten me a little bit on that of you find people saying, okay, you were the lawyer that represented SGU, and by such, some of us are blaming you for, taking that stand, or some of the people not taking the vaccine having to go home. Please, would you give me a little education on that? Thank you. God bless you. God bless Ron, and God bless all of the executive of the NDC. Have a great day.
That was that caller there. So Mitchell, you want to...
Thank you very much, caller, for your sentiments and your blessings and encouragement, specifically in relation to a request for enlightenment. An attorney or a lawyer simply represents his clients. That is your job. And perhaps more commonly people see it when you have a lawyer who's defending someone who's been accused of a crime. If you're accused, for example, of rape or murdering someone, the job of the lawyer in representing that defendant is essentially to represent him to the fullest of his ability, to make sure that the state proves the case against him, because oftentimes things may look one way, and when you get to the courthouse and the trial is taking place, people might have given statements to the police. They say one thing, if they get to the courthouse, they say another thing. At the end of the day, the jury will decide whether this person is innocent or guilty. If, for instance, the jury decides the person is innocent, the lawyer isn't accused of being a rapist, or the lawyer isn't accused of promoting rape. The reality is we live in an adversarial system sometimes, a judicial system many times, where one person is accused of doing something, or in a civil proceedings where people are arguing over who owns land, or those kinds of things, or who does property belong to. And our system requires persons, because of the intricacies of the law, the complexities of the law, because sometimes you have to negotiate, debate, advocate in court, to have an attorney representing them. And that's the job of lawyers, and that's what lawyers do.
All right.
The policy or actions that people take in the context of business and so on are determined by those persons. If there are no prohibitions, or if the state itself does not regulate any particular conduct, when it comes to contract matters, when it comes to agreements between employers and employees, then the employer and the employees are the ones who are required to negotiate and agree on those terms. In the context of COVID-19, we have to recognize that our government said that there would be no mandates which requires persons to be vaccinated. And at the same time, they also said, if an employer says that you're required to be vaccinated to continue working or to enter my premises, the employer is entitled to do so, because of the fact that COVID-19 is a contagious disease which can spread and sometimes have disastrous consequences. And in that context, employers and employees have had to some extent, with the guidance from the government, left to fend for themselves or to try and negotiate how they treat with the impact of COVID-19. Some employers have said, you must be vaccinated to enter our premises. And naturally, some employees have said, I'm not prepared to do so. And the end result then is that the relationship, the employer-employee relationship, is naturally going to come to an end because neither side is giving. Subsequent to this, we've had, in fact, legislation passed by the government, which contrary to what was said, right, has in fact mandated that for certain types of businesses, in order to operate your business, you must be vaccinated. And I'll give examples of barber shops, for example. Barbers are required to be vaccinated for them to conduct their barbering. So it is not lawyers, it is not me that not do I have the ability to regulate or pass legislation. We are not in government. And so the question of, and that goes back to my earlier point about consultation with our public, with our citizens, with our employers, with our employees, with the trade unions, with the Employers Federation, so that we can arrive at a policy that is in the collective best interest of Grenada. because what may be in the best interest of Grenada may not be in the best interest of other countries. So I certainly will say this. I am no fan of an employee not being able to work because the employee feels that he's been asked to take medication against his conscience. I do not support creating unemployment because unemployment creates poverty, and poverty creates instability and all of the social ills that come with it. And it will make it very difficult for our communities to grow and to improve and to remain stable if we take a policy that permits the creation of unemployment and that permits the creation of poverty. So certainly I am not in favor of a policy that will have that as a result, especially in the context of the ever-changing and evolving science in relation to COVID-19 vaccination and the spread and containment of the disease.
Okay. We do have a final caller online. Let's take this final caller. And of course, because we slowly do strap for time in terms of wrapping up the show for this morning, because we have lost that caller. And if someone comes in really quickly, of course, we'll be able to accommodate. But we, of course, already passed the 10 a.m. mark for the show this morning. And so let's get into final thoughts this morning from you, Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Redhead. Any final thoughts you want to share with the viewing and listening public this morning before we take a wrap for today?
If I could just add before the political leader comes in, on the issue regarding our independence, it speaks to the present situation, read the amendments that are being put forward for cannabis, for example. It is insufficient. It is more or just less than piecemeal, really. And it speaks to the impact that these sorts of weak legislations can have on the development of our people. Where we see cannabis and the industry going is the need for it to develop into a robust economic and medicinal sector that can help to bolster economic progress and develop our people locally. This requires some deep thought, not just dangling a few bits and pieces here and there before an election to try to get votes, but we must develop policies that can actually develop the lives of our people. So that's my closing comment to the whole discussion this morning.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mitchell, your final or closing comments this morning.
Sure, I endorse the sentiments of Ron, and that's the position of the National Democratic Congress on this particular issue. But again, I want to end where I started by encouraging our citizens to remain vigilant, to take part in our communities, to take part in the civic process, to take part in the electoral and the political process, to ensure that you are registered to vote. If you are not registered, you will not be able to exercise your franchise. And I do not want us to take the right to vote for granted. Our ancestors fought hard for this right. Not so long ago, even women could not vote. Not so long ago, if you didn't own property, you could not vote. So frankly, the right to vote in a true sense represents the equalization of all citizens in our country and the removal of class barriers where you had to be a man or where you had to own property to be able to exercise the right to elect your government. And so that right should not be taken lightly, it should not be taken for granted. There are many millions of persons around the world who still do not have that right. And so we want to encourage our citizens when the elections are called, whether it's snapped election or whether it's an election that goes down to the wire, to ensure that you take part in the process, that you get registered, and that you vote.
All right. I want to say once again, thank you to both of you gentlemen. Thanks for being here this morning. It was a pleasure, of course, having the bit of a chit-chat that we did. And fruitful information. I feel the listening and viewing public, of course, certainly learned a lot. So until we do this again, thanks for being on To The Point for today. Thanks once again.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, good day. That's where we, of course, wrap up To The Point for today, the 10th day, make that the 18th day of January 2022. Join me again tomorrow. Tomorrow we may not have To The Point program. Of course, there'll be that. Is it the post-cabinet press briefing? And that is expected for tomorrow. So next time around will be on Thursday. Have yourself a great day. And this is where I say peace. I'm out until you hear from me again. Have yourself a good day. So for our viewing audience via GBN TV and our Facebook and YouTube viewers, have yourself a great day.